All right, you can start.
Hold a sec. Right, you could begin.
Great, thank you. Good morning, all. Today, this group will be presenting on Chapter 6, Leading with Integrity and Moral Purpose. Before we begin, I'll just give a brief insight as to what leading with integrity and moral purpose involves. It is about conducting oneself and guiding others in a principled and ethical manner, driven by a deep sense of moral values and a commitment to doing what is right. It entails honesty and truthfulness, ethical decision making, consistency, accountability, empathy, fairness and justice, long-term perspective, social responsibilities, moral courage, inspiring others, which we will go into the course of this more in depth during the course of this presentation. In a sense, leading with integrity and moral purpose is about aligning leadership with a set of values and principles that prioritize doing what is right, what is just, and what is ethical. It is not about just achieving a success, but doing so in a way which benefits individuals and the society as a whole. I would like to introduce the members of our group. We have Mr. Navin Bihari, Mr. Rodney Kidaru, and myself, Kamaraj Raghunath. The introduction. We often find ourselves in ethical dilemmas. How do we react? How do we resolve these dilemmas? Or do we just ignore them? We pretend that it never occurred in the first place. Avoidance leaves us troubled. If you come across a dilemma and you do nothing, you avoid it. You are bothered by it. You are left troubled. Quick decisions preclude careful thought all about the aspects of the situation, which could raise questions of character. Participants may be caught up in competition that causes them to focus only on the bottom line or on winning at all costs. They may feel the need to please others without stopping to think about the implications of the decisions they make or the long-term effects. They may need to shove the problems under the rug to avoid tarnishing the organization's reputation or to avoid causing conflict in the group. Therefore, we should not rush to make decisions or solve these dilemmas without carefully reflecting on the aspects, the moral and ethical aspects of the issue that causes the dilemma in the first place. In short, we need to look at the dilemma at hand, come to a common and acceptable resolution that will benefit all. Creating and sustaining an ethical environment, organizational environment. Understanding and applying ethical theories and models that operate from organizational values or codes of conduct, as well as being aware of your own moral development and that of others in your organizations, help create and sustain this ethical organizational environment. We must consider and we must be aware of of our own moral development and that of our colleagues. That in itself, once we are aware of the development and that of our colleagues, we can sustain that environment. Nash in 1990, he proposed 4 qualities that are necessary for the participants to advance ethical standards within the organization. The 4 qualities are critical thinking skills to analyze and convey the ethical components of a problem or dilemma, a high degree of integrity, the ability to see situations from others' perspectives, and personal motivation to do the right thing all the time. It is important that when using these ethical decision methods and principles, You are prepared to receive backlash and for whatever ease of word. Persons may revolt. They may want to leave the organization. They may not agree with you and your principles because of these stands that you take. It is not common for persons to oppose these decision-making models because it may not be of what they perceive to be ethically right. We have the relational leadership model. This model is a relational process of people coming together to accomplish change or make a difference to benefit the common good. All persons, being a leader, a manager, a middle manager, they're empowered to set the tone in the organizational climate. This will foster and support ethical and moral actions and sensitivities. By appointing a person to be the standard bearer will not achieve that same ethic that we are trying to achieve, as opposed to when all persons who are engaged in this situation come together as one to do what is right. In other words, inclusion. All members of the organization must share that value. Leading with integrity. It's difficult to lead with integrity when your own values and principles clash with others. As I mentioned before, we are left with three options when your morals and values do not contrast with mine. Either you can ignore the situation, address the situation, work together to benefit the organization, or leave. Moral purpose. It takes courage to do the right thing when required. If you take a stand against unethical behavior, you risk being sidelined for promotion. You risk your job. Kidline 2005 described moral courage as the quality of mind, spirit to face up to ethical challenges firmly and confidently without flinching or retreating. You must believe in your moral values and ethical principles and have the strength to not compromise these values for whatever reasons. In short, what this is saying, you know your morality, you know your integrity, you know how ethical you are. Do not compromise that for the sake of bending to please someone or something. You know what is right, stand for what is right and have the courage to stand in the face of being sidelined, in the face of being punished, for want of a better word. There are several assumptions about ethical leadership. It is not universal, but you would believe that what you believe to be unethical may be considered to be morally responsible to another. My view about being ethical may not augur well with you because you have your own views. Lucas and Anello in 1995 proposed 8 such assumptions. Ethics is the heart of leadership, leading with integrity. It is the central issue in leadership. You cannot have a complex discussion about leadership without including the ethical components associated with leadership process. Good leadership means leadership that is effective and that goals were achieved and that follows a sound and ethical process. The means do justify the ends when leading with integrity. All leadership is value-driven. We need to reframe leadership so that it represents values that reflect good, ethical leadership. Participants and leaders bring to the organization their own values and beliefs about how people should be treated, notions of what is right versus what is wrong, and ideas about what is just and what is fair. Organizations and communities are value-driven as opposed to value neutral. Personal values intersect with organizational values. The journey to ethical leadership begins with an examination of personal values as well as ongoing reflection of personal core values and how these values are related to the values of an organization or the community. Your personal moral compass will guide you in wrestling with ethical dilemmas and eventually will point you in the direction of making a decision based on ethical analysis. Consideration of opposing viewpoints, your personal values and the values of your organization. Ethical leadership can be learned. Ethical learning is a process involving experience, reflection, conceptualization, and application. Trial and error experiences can sharpen your ethical analysis as well as your reflection about notions of what is just and fair in a given situation. You can learn this before you must act and make a decision. The life experiences you gain over time will affect your development as being an ethical leader. The fifth one, ethical leadership, involves a connection between ethical thought and action. Linked moral reasoning with values and action is imperative in leaderships. The point of this chapter is not to have or memorize all the ethical theories, but it was to engage you in ethical analysis and insights based on theories and concepts applied to real life experiences. Character development is an essential ingredient of ethical leadership. A leader's character is defined by his or her actions and behaviors, not simply by the values that are exposed. Leaders can be popular, yet not be respected by the public because they lack the congruency between their values and their actions. In other words, they do not walk their talk. Ethical leadership is a shared process. Members of all levels of an organization have the opportunity and responsibility to participate in the process of exercising ethical leadership. Ethical leadership is a shared process, not just the responsibility of a positional leader, but leaders and the members participate. They share the responsibility of advancing core organizational values and doing the right thing. Members often are called upon to be courageous and to advocate what is right, despite taking risks such as losing the job, alienating a friends, or risk being promoted. Organizations that are empowering and inclusive involve members in wrestling with ethical dilemmas and seek their advice on how to resolve problems. The eighth assumption, everything we do teaches. Role modeling is a powerful way to influence the ethical climate in families, organizations, and communities. We learn from small by watching others, and we make judgments about what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior within the organization. If any member, including the leader, behaves or discriminates against others, the membership will tend to follow that process. Conversely, if the leader values diversity and does not discriminate, its members would so follow. Cultural assumptions. Cultural assumptions exist over a cultural content. It is culturally bound or culture specific. There's no universal agreement on what behaviors or practices are considered appropriate, legal, ethical, or moral. An example, discrimination against women in the Middle East. may be considered ethical and legal there. However, in the Western societies, such as the US, those same practices may be considered as being discriminatory, oppressive, or even illegal. Common values and culture. Mendonca Kanungo and Mendonca in 1996 suggest that morally good acts are based on moral values that are universal because they incorporate fundamental values. These values include truth, goodness, beauty, courage, and justice. And these values are found in all cultures, although some cultures may differ with regard to the application of these values. Kidder, he defined 8 common values from 16 countries. Those are being love, truthfulness, fairness, freedom, unity, tolerance, responsibility, and respect for life. Yet again, these values would be, it may differ with regard to the application of these values in the different countries. Seligman, he identified 6 virtues with over 200 religious practices and traditions. He identified as being wisdom and knowledge, courage, love and humanity, justice, temperance, transcendence, spirituality, and transcendence. Again, different cultures may provide varying definitions of these virtues. So, what these common values really mean, they may seem similar in love, truthfulness, fairness, these things. However, the interpretation of these values in different cultures may have different meanings. Culture tolerance. Cultural tolerance suggests that difference in practices are recognized, but not for the purpose of affecting or imposing change. The goal in recognizing these differences is to understand them and not judge, and in some case participate or fund. International companies follow local laws, norms, and practices associated with the respective countries they operate in. Meaning, when you go to another country, they have to adopt these cultural norms and practices in order to be accepted within that culture. It may not be what they are accustomed to, but for acceptance sake, they tend to accept that country's cultural practices. Transformational leadership and theory. From this slide, Mr. Bihari will take the presentation and continue the effort. Mr. Bihari?
Thanks, Mr. Raghunath. Okay, my interpretation of the transformational leadership theory is basically a theory with a leadership style and model that focuses on really inspiring and motivating workers or your followers to achieve their full potential and exceed the expectations of the business or the company or the workplace that you're working. It was first introduced by Mr. James McGregor Burns in 1978 and later expanded upon research done by Mr. Bernard Bass. So basically, the theory is credited in causing change in persons and social systems. It creates valuable and positive change with the end goal of developing your workers or followers, as the case may be, into leaders. There are also some key characteristics that a transformational leader must possess. For example, charisma and inspiration. A transformational leader often is charismatic and has a compelling vision for the future. He can inspire or she can inspire and motivate workers, followers through enthusiasm and energy. A transformational leader can also encourage creativity and innovative thinking. among workers and followers. A transformational leader can also lead by genuine example and concern for the needs of other workers and followers. You can provide a mentorship also and support groups. A transformational leader can also be a role model to other persons. For example, in my work that I do, being the manager of a police station, I try to encourage my subordinates and peers to engage in community work and partner with the community to be more important and more effective and a way it might solve crime or prevent crime. So I encourage my peers to shift away from more of the traditional approach of policing to a more modernized type of policing. That is where the transformational theory can work in our organization, well, in my organization. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right, modeling for a moral purpose. Some persons who admire or identify with their leader or colleague often tend to imitate that person's behavior and accept their values. This merely refers to a practice of demonstrating ethical and moral behavior with the intention of influencing and inspiring others to do the same. It involves setting an example through one's actions and choices and promotes a positive behavior, values, principles, and ethical standards. This can serve a greater good for an institution or an organization. Some key aspects of modeling for a moral purpose may be, as we said before, setting a positive example. Individuals who model for a moral purpose strive to role models by consistently exhibiting ethical behavior and values. This can lead to being a more mindful person and impact on their actions to have others follow in their footsteps. Moral values can also align with great values involving one's actions with their deeply held moral and ethical values. It means living in accordance with one's principles and beliefs and demonstrating consistency in behavior. By living ethically and morally, individuals who model for a moral purpose inspire those around them to do the same. Their actions can motivate and encourage others to make morally sound decisions. For example, again, in the job that I perform as a police officer, I must demonstrate ethical conduct in all my interactions with the public and also with my colleagues. This may include like honesty, integrity, and commitment to upholding the law without biasness. Next slide, please. Observational learning was first introduced by Mr. Bandura, postulated that persons can learn indirectly merely by observation and vicarious learning. Imitation or mimesis is a concept of observational learning which have been used by Greek scholars to teach their young students. Behavioral modeling by leaders and participants creates a type of vicarious learning stimulus in organizational settings. In my own words, this learning can be learned as a type of modeling or social learning that occurs as a result of imitating and modeling behavior and actions of and outcomes of others. So if I see a person acting in a certain type of behavior, I might want to model that person's behavior This concept, as by psychologist Mr. Bandura, he conducted an extensive research on the subject of human behavior and cognitive development, and certain observations were made. As spoken before, being a role model, individuals learn by watching their behaviors and actions of others. They also observe and imitate behavior, and they take note of the consequences and experiences that could be the outcome of taking certain actions or modeling certain persons. There are also some negative consequences which is less likely to adopt it, because a person may not want to adopt negative behaviors from other persons, because in general they'll know that consequences may arise. Another example, like in my job again, like when I was a recruit, I can remember having to undergo a lot of training, which I would normally experience by observing and learning from the more experienced instructors at the police academy and so on. So that was one aspect of my experience in this whole observational learning. Next slide, please. Right, impact of vicarious learning or behavioral modeling. Individuals can learn ethical principles and practices by observing those who model these practices in their leadership roles and approaches. An example can be seen where a committee changes a traditional fundraiser that was discriminatory or offensive to a group of people to one which is more inclusive and non-offensive or discriminatory. This change will influence others to become more ethical and responsible in their behavior. These persons will be viewed as having high levels of integrity and motivated to do what is morally right. This vicarious learning, also known as observational learning or behavioral modeling, can have a significant impact on individuals and society as a whole. This form of learning occurs when individuals observe the behaviors, actions, and consequences experienced by others, which can influence their own behavior and decision making. The impact of vicarious learning can be both positive and negative, which can have an effect on the various aspects of life, which includes our educational learning, our social behavior, and personal development. Some of our key impacts of vicarious learning can be the efficiency of learning. Vicarious learning can be an efficient way to acquire new knowledge and skills. Instead of personally experiencing these consequences of our actions, individuals can learn from others, both positive and negative. It also teaches a person to socialize and be interacted with family members and peers and role models at work. It contributes to an individual's socialization behavior, norms, values, and customs, and the culture of society. It also helps an individual to learn the practical skills, such as like playing an instrument or the simple thing as cooking or doing handcraft or other skill areas. So again, as a police officer, I often serve as a mentor to probationers at work or new recruits that pass out and come to the police stations to work. I try to help them and show them the right, correct principles and values. And I also teach them the vicarious learning is an integral part of learning. They must learn to observe from the experience and actions of other senior police officers that are wrong and make the right decisions when it comes to being recruits and probationers in the PTPS. If we move on to the next slide, please. Moral talk, dialogue leadership. Do you find it difficult to engage in conversation about moral questions? Leaders and members should actively engage in these types of discussions to allow everyone to explore moral complexities and dimensions of the problems of dilemma. The dialogue leader initiates a discussion with others about what is ethical and what the material interests of an individuals are. This type of leadership models ethical behavior and sustains an ethical environment. Key to this type of talk is to avoid moral muteness among the members. Moral talk refers to discussions or conversations or dialogues that revolve around ethical, moral, and spiritual values. Moral talk is an important aspect of leadership as it involves engaging in conversations and facilitating discussions that pertain to ethical decision making, guiding principles, and the moral direction of an organization or a community. Moral talk is relevant to leadership. Leaders can use moral talk to establish and communicate the ethical standards and values of the organization or community. They can articulate the principles that guide decision making and behavior within the group. Moral talk can also help create and maintain an ethical culture within an organization. Leaders can initiate and encourage conversations about moral dilemmas, ethical behavior, and the alignment of actions within the organization's values. Engaging in moral talk reinforces the importance of accountability. Leaders can emphasize the need for individuals to take responsibility for their actions and decisions, ensuring that they align with the organization's moral compass. Again, as I spoke before, police leaders and officers engage in moral talk to establish and communicate ethical standards and values that guide the behavior and decision making within the police service. This can also include discussions about integrity, honesty, respect, and the duty to protect and serve the community. Next slide, please. Ethical decision-making models are really frameworks that guide individuals and organizations in making morally sound and principled choices. These models provide a structured approach to assessing ethical dilemmas, considering various factors and arriving at decisions that align with ethical values and principles. There are a few common ethical decision-making models, such as the ethical decision-making model by Josephine Jovenson Institute to identify the problem, identify the relevant moral principles, brainstorm the possible courses of actions. We can consider the consequences of each action and make a decision whereby we monitor and evaluate the decision made over time. The 9 steps model to KIDA will really be what I just said, and making informed decisions and ethical consideration, providing justification for chosen decisions, and implementing decisions and monitoring the results. Those are the 9 steps model of KIDA. Next slide, please. The relational leadership model is an approach to leadership that emphasizes the importance of building and maintaining positive relationships with individuals, teams, and organizations. This model views leadership as a collaborative and interactive process that focuses on fostering strong connections, communication, and trust among all stakeholders. Two key characteristics or principles can be the emphasis on relationships. At the core of the relational leadership model is the belief that the effective leadership is built on healthy and positive relationships. Leaders are encouraged to connect with others on a personal and emotional level, which can lead to greater trust and collaboration. Also, mutual influence in a model of leadership is seen as a two-way process. It's seen as a two-way process where leaders and followers influence each other. Leaders are open to feedback and input from their team leaders, as they can actively seek to understand the needs and perspectives of those that lead. This relational leadership model in policing especially is an approach that emphasizes building and maintaining positive relationships between police service and the community that they serve. It also recognizes effective policing that solely enforces the law and fosters trust and communication between the community and the police officers. As we move along on to the next slide, please. The integrity of many professional organizations are hinged on its professional codes of conduct. These ethical standards uphold the expected behavioral patterns of its members and promotes the organization's moral standards and its integrity. This professional code of conduct is a set of ethical guidelines and principles that provide a framework for acceptable behavior and ethical decision making within a specific profession or industry. These codes are designed to promote integrity, professionalism, and ethical conduct among individuals working in a profession. Different professions have their own unique codes of conduct tailored to specific values and responsibilities in that field. Example again, in law enforcement, we have to treat individuals with dignity and respect. That's one code or conduct that we have in the aspect of policing. We also try to act with integrity and fairness, try to avoid corrupt practices, conflict of interests, and abuse of power. We also try to build positive community relations and trust. These professional codes of conduct provide a foundation for ethical decision-making and behavior within each respective field. Professionals are expected to adhere to those conducts to maintain public trust, uphold integrity among the professionals, and ensure well-being of those we serve. Violations of these conducts may result in professional and legal consequences, including disciplinary action or loss of professional license, and so on. As we move along to the next slide. Ethical decision-making models encourages persons to work through dilemmas with a moral purpose in mind and provide frameworks which guide decision-making and analysis. Instead of reacting quickly to dilemmas one should first consider the various steps, including the ethical analysis towards making sound ethical decisions. Sometimes we could ask ourselves if we should see a friend doing something unethical, how would you respond to it? Would you follow the code and report him? Or would you speak to him and try to dissuade him not to cheat? Or will you have to report him? Do you initiate a decision-making process? Or will you act with moral purpose and just do nothing? Making sound ethical decisions involves a deliberate and thoughtful process that considers moral principles, values, and the potential consequences of your actions. There are certain steps to help make sound and ethical decisions. The first step, as we said, is to identify that we are facing an ethical dilemma. It may involve a choice between competing values or principles. Next, we can gather information, gather the relevant information about the situation, understand the context, the person involved, and the potential consequences that your decision might make. You also have to identify the stakeholders and determine who is affected by making the decision. You have to consider the principles and values. We also have to evaluate the options, identify the different types of action that can be taken. We also can consider the advantages and disadvantages that each option can give. We also have to take into consideration the long-term consequences, how it may affect an organization. We also weigh in on the benefits and the disadvantages and all these sort of things we take into consideration when we see something unethical taking place in our work environment or in organizations. It also requires taking a multifaceted approach that involves individuals, organizations, and society as a whole. It involves creating an unethical culture, providing guidance and education, enforcing accountability, and promoting transparency and integrity in all aspects of life. Next slide, please. So these are the questions that I spoke of earlier. Should you see a friend doing something wrong? What would you do? What actions would you take? How would you respond? How would you follow the code of conduct? Would you report that person? Would you speak to him, or would you try to discourage him from doing what he's doing? Or would you take make the choice of doing the correct thing or initiating a decision-making process, or would you act with all moral response to do nothing? Next slide, Mr. Raghunath. At this venture, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Rodney Kedaru, who will lead us to the end of this presentation, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Tough choices. Have you ever done something that is the morally right thing to do, but you keep telling yourself that you should not have done it? We all do tough choices, but why was it difficult to choose? Imagine choosing between a peanut butter sandwich and a box of KFC. That was an easy choice. You don't keep dwelling about this one, but sometimes you still think what to do, why not, if not. You keep dwelling on a decision even after you made a decision. Tough decisions are the ones that does this to you. It makes you question yourself on your choices, which are before you. And after you do, you still contemplate about it. sometimes all the time, every day, and even sometimes for the rest of your life, you question your decisions that you made. Anything comes to mind to anyone? Things like your financial choices, marriage, even your profession. I'm sure these things, sometimes you still question yourself about it, although you already made those choices. I really like to hear the answers, but maybe some other time. Next slide, please. Right versus wrong versus right versus right. Paul Kidder is a professor of the Seattle University, and he concentrated in areas of ethics and explained that tough decisions is not right versus wrong. That is easy, which is really, really easy, but is right versus right, which is a dilemma because every side you choose is for or against one of your core values. No matter which one you choose, there's something against or against your what you think or your values or for your values. So it puts you in a dilemma. And he developed a four dilemma paradigm model to help you to choose to come to a decision on making decisions on tough choices. Next slide. Justice versus mercy. Talks about a patient who was in the hospital in a coma for 15 years. What would you do? Would you pull the plug on them? Or would you and ease their family and them from going through this agony? What would you do? Similar as if in the same instance, someone commits a murder and is convicted and sentenced to death by hanging. Would you carry out the death penalty? Or would you have show mercy and have the sentence commuted to life imprisonment instead? Would you show mercy rather than take a life? It's a decision to make. One is against, and it might be for your moral values. So these choices are deemed tough choices. Next slide. Community versus individual versus community. This is an instance where a father who do not have custody of his custody rights to his son, and his wife died, and because of this divorce, he did not have the right to his son, but he wanted his son back with him in Cuba, and they are his relatives in Miami, which is the son's relative was trying to have him to stay in Miami, and it's like one against all. Would numbers influence your decision? Would you have a choice to make, and because there's more persons against your choice, would you change your choice and go with their choice because it's just you against a number of persons? Would that influence your choice? Next slide. Truth versus loyalty. This is about the instance where a family member commits a crime. What will you do? You do the right thing, you'll weigh off is your family, so you'll weigh the crime, the consequences, and then make a decision. But putting that aside, without measuring and weighing the consequences, what is your moral belief? What is your integrity? This is what should be considered when you choose what to do, not the consequences. Do not think of the consequences and make your decision, because it should not influence your moral values and beliefs. Next slide. Paul Kidder came up with principles of ethical decision making, right? This is to help you make a decision, follow these three guidelines, and you might come to a proper or correct or the best decision, right? One, end-based thinking. This is do whatever produces the greatest good for the greatest number of persons, but taking into consideration the outcome, how it will benefit the majority. So if you make a choice, think how it will benefit and how much people will benefit, and what are the benefits that majority of person comparing to the other decision that you will make, who it will benefit, how it will benefit them, and how much people it will benefit. These are things to take into consideration. rule-based thinking. Do what others should do. Follow what is outlined in your duty. In other words, go according to the books. Follow the rules. Right? Don't, if there's a set of rules, follow the rules. Do not go against rules. The rules are written, follow the rules. Another guideline, fear-based thinking. This involves around love. Do to others as you would want them to do to you. Put yourself in their shoes. Thereby you understand their actions and you help someone as you would want them to help you. Show the same compassion towards them as you would want them to show to you. These three guidelines, kiddo, if you follow them, you're supposed and most likely to come to the best decision. Next slide, please. Ethical principles and standard. Beauchamp and Turin, they came up with 5 principles to follow in living an ethical life and is used to guide person in decision making also. 1, respecting autonomy. Freedom of choice, allowing persons to choose freely and to develop their own values. You should not influence someone to develop a value. You will be influencing them based on your belief. You should allow them to develop their values freely. Doing no harm, free from harm to others, both physical and psychological. Whatever you choose, it must not be a burden or affect anyone physically or psychologically. Benefiting others. Promoting the interests of the organization rather than yourself. Think about the bigger picture, think about the organization that you are involved in, and think what would benefit them rather than you make a decision that will only benefit you. Right? Being just. Treat people fairly and equally. Number 5, being faithful. Keep your promises. Be loyal to your organization. Gain the trust of your employees. These principles will make you choose the correct choice as it considers how it affects others. So what he's practically saying, these 5 guidelines, if you choose along these, and these takes people feelings and other people into consideration. And if you follow it, how it will affect them, you'll know what to do. You'll choose the correct choice, the correct tough choice. Next slide. All professions have codes of conduct and ethics, which guides professionals in decision making. But it is also there to protect that person, you, meaning you, from any pressure or questionable conduct. If you follow rules, you cannot be questioned. Follow the rules, you cannot be questioned. You break the rules, then you put yourself to be questioned and people to judge you and think you do right and wrong, you know. Does anyone know what's the newspaper test? Anyone? A newspaper test? What is usually in front page of the newspaper these days and most times? Negative news. Most of the time is negative news, right? So think before you act, because you don't want to make the front page. So when you act, make sure you do the correct and ethical thing. Because when you do otherwise, and you do the wrong thing, obviously, you might end up on the front page of the newspaper. So do the right thing. In summary, leading with integrity and morality is a complex process which does not happen overnight. It starts with the individual, your own morals and integrity, your influence, your thoughts, your actions, your desire to do the right and to change the wrong thing. It must start with one and incorporate others, because you can't do it all alone by yourself. As it is well said in this slide and this summary, imagine a society, what an organization, a community, or the world would look like if we all practice and strive to create and sustain an ethical environment by rewarding ethical acts, engaging in moral talks, and carefully working in groups to resolve dilemmas by using decision-making models. Decision-making models helps you make the right choice. And imagine a society if everyone made the right choice. Imagine how life and society and this world will be if we made the right choices throughout, everyone. from you as an individual to straight up to everyone in this world. Imagine how life would be. So that's the summary. There on ethical thinking and decision making. This is our list of citations here before you. And we want to thank you for listening and paying attention to the class. And if you all have any questions to any one of us, you can feel free to do so at this time.
Okay, if there are no questions, I'll stop the recording now.